Hi, this is English 241, Early American Literature, and today I'm going to talk to you about some of the literary elements in Native American literature, and specifically Black Hawk's autobiography. So this is a meme that I came up in my Facebook feed a couple of times, and usually it's around Columbus Day that it's posted, but I think it's ironic, of course. Homeland Security fighting terrorism since 1492 kind of gives you a different perspective of what Homeland Security might possibly have meant to the Native Americans. So I want to begin by just giving you some facts and figures, just some basic information about what happened to the Native Americans with the arrival of the Europeans. So when the Europeans arrived, there were approximately 18 million Native Americans in North America as a whole, that's including Mexico, and there were about 5 million in the United States. In 1990, the census for the number of Native Americans is 1,959,234. So before European arrival, there were about 300 different cultural groups and 200 different languages. In 1940, there were about 149 languages in use. And this is important because you can see we went from 23 million Native Americans to just under 2 million Native Americans. Well, not very quickly, but relatively quickly. And you can also see that their languages have gone down just by 50, so that's not that much. Some dates, just to kind of give you a timeline. In 1637, there was the Pequot War. Then from 72 to 76, we had King Philip's War, and that's what was going on when Mary Rowlandson was captured. In 1680, we had the Pueblo Revolt. From 1644 to 1680, the Iroquois defeated other tribes and expanded westward. In 1830, we have the actual Indian Removal Act, and in 1838, we have the Trail of Tears, which is the Cherokee removal to Oklahoma. Some elements in Native American literature. One of the things that Native American literature has some unique attributes that are really important to understanding them and important to understanding the literature that we read by them, both contemporary and historical. So one of the things that is really important, or one of the elements, is the importance of place. Native Americans were, in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases were transient, and they moved depending on the weather, the time of year. And they did this to maintain their lifestyle. Obviously, if you're living in the upper peninsula of Michigan during the winter, it gets, a significant amount of snow. The hunting is more limited, and certainly you're not gathering any foods and you're not farming. Another element in Native American literature is the interconnectedness of all life forms. Native Americans really see everything as being connected. Kind of like the Puritans saw everything was connected to God, Native Americans see everything connected in nature. They also have a very profound sense of sacredness of the earth. The earth is the mother. It gives us life. It gives us food to eat. It keeps us warm. It makes us cold. It gives us water. So it really is the essence of our life to Native Americans. And the insistence on the power of language to articulate and influence. You'll see this a lot, and I'll talk about this a little bit later on in the lecture, but you see this with Black Hawk. He's always trying to convince people to do the right thing, and he thinks that if he can just talk to them, that they'll understand and do the right thing. And just like we have the importance of place, we have this intimate connection to the land. They feel, like I said, with the sacredness of the earth, that the land is given to them by by the Father, and the Father has given them this land or allowed them to use this land, and it's their job to protect it and to take care of the land and to use it responsibly. Now, to them, responsibly wasn't, taking care of the environment. It was, well, it was taking care of their environment, of using the resources intelligently, and not over hunting, overfishing, those kinds of things, although they did do that in some cases. So again, this is a broad generalization of what the tropes are that you'll see in Native American literature. So there are types of literature. They have oral literatures, which recall myth, ritual dramas. These are seen in ceremonies, songs, and religious rituals that they have. And then they have storytelling. And these are myths again, tales, and histories, and just oratory, just the practice of speaking. They have life histories, which are recorded and translated, and this is important, and we'll come back to this, by non-Native American writers and editors. And that's what Black Hawk's autobiography is. It is recorded and translated by someone who is not Native American. So it's a translation from one language to another, and it's actually two languages, and I'll talk about that, because I believe in Black Hawk's case, the translator was French. So it's translated from the Native American Black Hawk's language to French, and then from French to English. So we've got three levels of translation. And the written literatures for Native Americans did not begin until the late 18th century. So it isn't until the 1700s that we get anything at all remotely in writing from Native Americans. So their cultures, their people have existed for thousands of years, hundreds of years, compared to Europeans without writing. And this is significant in that we don't get a lot of information, a lot of history from them, because once that oral nature has been destroyed or overtaken by writing, what was lost from memory and ritual is gone forever. So a lot of the history we just don't read. So you need to remember the important elements. And ways to do that are from repetition. So you repeat patterns over and over again. Enumeration, you number things. One thing, two things, three things. And then incremental development. This happened, then this happened, then this happened. Another way to help you remember is with ritual beginnings and endings. So all stories begin in this way, or many stories begin in this way. Many stories end in this way. A narrative will begin this way and it will end this way. And then there's the use of archaic language. And again, using that kind of um, uh, archaic form of our language helps to reinforce and to remember the stories. So structures that are used in oral literature. There's a harmonious situation in the introduction. Everything is calm and peaceful. Life is good. We're all living happily. And then the thesis is something bad happens. There's some kind of disruption to the harmony. Something happens. Maybe it's a famine. Maybe it's somebody getting injured or murdered, but something bad happens. And then there's the antithesis, or the antithesis rather. And that's, what can we do to overcome this? What what do we have to do to fix this problem, to overcome this disruption in harmony, to put nature back into its even keel. And then the conclusion is when harmony is restored and completed by cycles of four or some power of four songs, four nights, etc., that kind of thing. So there's some kind of elements of four that you'll see. The problems, again, just to reiterate, with written versions of oral literature is that they're recorded by non-Indians. So someone who doesn't speak the language, like I said, is recording it. And the result is multiple translations from speech to print, often from a native language to English, from performance to page, or from one cultural community to another. There are all these different layers on the translations. So when someone is translating a story told by a Native American, they have to also, translate, again, because of performance and ritual. Those are all part of the storytelling. And so those have to be described in order for you to get the full picture or to understand the full meaning of the story. And often those are neglected and aren't included. So what does this give us to read then? We've got these layers, and it gives us a version of a single or maybe several performances from a specific historical moment in a precise place, shaped by a singular audience and reconfigured by a usually European American writer/editor. So it's one person's experience, a non-Native American's experience of a Native American experience. And so we have this lens when we are looking at it that doesn't have to do with Native Americans so much as who we are. So how does this change the story that we get? Well, it comes back to the importance of context. Texts are not static, authentic sources of something that happened. It's rather an interpretation. Oral literature has a dramatic impact, and that's often not conveyed. And written translations of myths, songs, and stories are just recorded versions, because these myths and songs and stories change each time they're retold by new people, by a new generation, by just another individual will put his or her spin on that story. So this also gives us a difference in perspectives. And it's important to understand, just at this time in history, there's a strong difference between how European Americans understand nature and how Native Americans understand nature. So European Americans see nature as something to be subdued, to conquered. We're going to own the land. We're going to make money from this. We're going to find gold. We're going to strike it rich. So they have a very different perspective on the land and nature from Native Americans. Native Americans view nature as a powerful force to be respected and a nurturing mother to be honored, not something to be subdued and conquered. And they see the land as their means of survival, of their way of living, of how they grow and are sustained. So that's a very different perspective on land and nature than what we normally as Native Americans have. As Americans have, sorry. So here we have, these are paintings of Black Hawk, and there are several different titles of his autobiography. I use Black Hawk: A Life. You can call it The Autobiography of Black Hawk or Black Hawk's Autobiography. All of them are perfectly correct and fine. So some themes that you will see when you are reading Black Hawk's autobiography. There are language barriers, a sense of otherness, and there's the dedication. Make sure that you read that. Retribution and pride are really important, and while there's a little bit of violence in this piece, most of it is about wars that happened and that were killed, and people that were killed. And but the idea of retribution with Native Americans, and it's not nearly, I think it's somewhat evident in this piece, but another piece that I am deleting because it's summer and you don't need to read everything under the planet about this. But it shows that once retribution is had, that there's no sense of holding a grudge. So, for example, if one tribe kills a member of another tribe, that tribe will, if let's just say the Iroquois kill a Cherokee, then the Cherokee will kill one Iroquois and call it quits. Like, okay, we've had our retribution, everything's fine, let's keep on going. Pride is really significant in uh, uh, Black Hawk's story, and you will see that and how it took him so long to finally concede to the Europeans because of his pride. And his pride is largely related to family, to his sense of family, to his sense of his tribe, of his responsibility to his community and to his people. There's also a strong sense of justice and injustice, and you will see this a great deal in Black Hawk's autobiography. He thinks that because his people were tricked, that the Europeans, the Americans, will do the right thing and take care and respect the Native Americans' land, and they don't. And he's just mystified by this. He can't understand the injustice of the situation. He can't understand why they don't honor the truth and why they lie and deceive. This is just really shows his naivete significantly. And the value of home versus the value of land. You will understand that he calls places home, and this is where they live in different parts of the year. And then, along with justice and injustice, we have that sense of truth, of what is truth, and that you should always believe what is true and follow the truth. And he finds that the European Americans do not value or respect truth. And this is, again, his sense of justice and injustice is just really confused. This is a picture at Black Hawk Park in Iowa, or I'm sorry, Illinois. And I just thought I'd put it in there so you could see what it looks like today. So oh, this is a duplicate. And the reason this is a duplicate is because you will see these in Black Hawk's autobiography. You will see repetition. You will see him counting things. You will see how things develop incrementally, and that we have a very ritual beginning and a ritual ending, and the use of archaic language. Certainly, the language that this autobiography is transcribed into is quite archaic, and you will experience that as you're reading through it. Again, be aware of these. Look at the harmonious situation in the introduction. Pay attention to what disrupts the harmony. Look at how what measures are employed to try to overcome this disruption. And then look at the ending of how harmony is restored. So pay attention to these elements in Black Hawk. You will definitely see them. Again, another picture of Black Hawk's. These are the lands where he actually lived part of the time of the year. So I liked these because I thought that when I read Black Hawk's autobiography, it's quite it brings across a lot of images, and I thought if you could see this, that you might be able to compare that to what you see in your mind as you're reading the story. This is a quote. I reflected upon the ingratitude of the whites when I saw their fine houses, rich harvests, and everything desirable around them, and recollected that all this land had been ours, for which me and my people had never received a dollar, and that the whites, not satisfied until they took our village and our graveyards from us and removed us across the Mississippi. This is so profoundly sad to me, but I think when you read it in the context of the story, you will see just how brutally hurtful. I just don't even have the words for how powerful this is when you see where Black Hawk ends up. This is sort of part of his ending, or leading up to it. The tomahawk is buried forever. We will forget what has passed, and may the watchword between the Americans and Sacs and Foxes ever be friendship. So he's trying to get back to that sense of harmony, and you will see that in the ending. This brings us back to Brooks, the Brooks piece, because I want to kind of tie some things together. And I'm going to do that with a couple of quotes. So she says, what does the world look like to those who understand catastrophic violence not as exceptional to, but rather as constitutive of modern realities? So for Black Hawk, he sees violence as the violence of the European Americans as devastating, and has changing his life in ways that you and I can't even comprehend or begin to imagine. Again, to go back to the idea of race and how people of color experience racism. Certainly, when you're reading through Black Hawk's autobiography, you will begin, I hope, to really understand the depth of otherness that Native Americans were subjected to, and that the idea of race for Native Americans was something completely foreign. They had tribes, people that lived over here, and yeah, they didn't like the other tribes, but they didn't think of them as different because of their skin color. They thought of them as different because of their beliefs or their lifestyles or their habits, but not simply because their skin was a different color. It was what they did, and really that's what the Native Americans felt about all people, was your actions defined who you are. So it was kind of existential in that sense, that your identity is construed by who you are and what you do, how you behave, how you treat people is who you are. And when we talk about the white race as a historically constructed social formation, we see the importance of how defining Native Americans as others really pushes them to be treated as horribly as they are treated. So how do people of color experience racism? We have colonial policies and the legitimization of enslavement and extermination with the colonization of the Americas. We have the appropriation of Native American land. And this quote, there is no solution to historical genocide and land theft. You can't go back and fix it. You can't go back and change it. You can't go back in history and make it any better. It is, I hate this phrase, it is what it is though. And this historical brutality exists, and European Americans were responsible for it. And there is nothing that will change that. There is no way to make it any better. But it is important to understand it, because I can't I don't think that we can understand who we are as a country today if we don't understand the brutality that our country was founded on. Um, and the brutality comes from the Native Americans. Certainly, their eye for an eye beliefs contradicted European and American beliefs. Um, for law and order and that kind of concepts. But the brutality that we visited upon the Native Americans is unspeakable. And to understand who Native Americans are today and who we are today and our European American relationship, our American relationship today, our modern relationship with the Native Americans is really still quite, personal opinion here, guys, reprehensible. If you've never been to uh, uh, a Native American area and experienced the land, it, it's hard to really understand what all was lost. Um, and simply just think about it this way. If someone walked into your home, your apartment, the place where you're living right now and said, "Get out because I'm here and I'm taking over," what would you do? You would fight. You wouldn't just simply bow your head and say, "Okay, I'm going to leave now," and let them have your land and let them take your home. You would fight with everything that you could to keep what was yours. I mean, that would be natural. And in our American justice system, you would have the right to do that if someone came into your home and tried to take your things away from you. It's legitimate to fight for your own property, for your own home. But um, at that time, the Native Americans had absolutely no rights, and so everything that they knew was taken completely away from them. So back to the white race is a historically constructed social formation. What does this mean when we think about otherness? What does it really mean? And in what ways is race constructed? Um, and how did the construction of race benefit Anglo-Americans? And so I think that I've shown, at least I hope, with your readings and our discussions up to now, what has happened in America based on this concept of otherness, this concept of race, and how it very in many, many ways, economically, politically, mostly economically, but you could also just talk about power in general, has benefited the European Americans. And why is this so important to us today? Why am I talking about this today? Why does it matter if our country was founded on this racist construction? Why does that matter? And I'm not going to answer that question because there are lots of different answers to it. But what I want you to do is think about that. Think about why it's important that our country was founded in the way that it was, with all of this brutality and murder and destruction. What does that say about us? How has that shaped our values, or has it? Maybe it hasn't impacted us at all. Maybe we're completely different people now, and have nothing to do with our ancestors or those people who came before us. But think about this um, when you're going through this week's assignments. This is a quote from Crazy Horse, who was a Sioux. "We did not ask you white men to come here. The Great Spirit gave us this country as a home. You had yours. We did not interfere with you. The Great Spirit gave us plenty of land to live on, and buffalo, deer, antelope, and other game. But you have come here. You are taking my land from me. You are killing off our game. So it is hard for us to live. Many of you, when you were writing about the quiz question I asked about Mary Rawlinson and why did the Indians attack uh, her house, uh, didn't know or didn't understand that it was part of King Philip's War, and the reason that the Indians became a part of that was because Mary Rawlinson's group had taken their land, were using their resources, and were making it much more difficult for them to live. And so that was one of the reasons that they attacked them. So this is where a lot of this information from this lecture came from. If you want to know more, I suggest that you go to these places because you'll learn a little bit more in depth. If you have any questions, you know what to do. Post it in the discussion board, and I look forward to seeing you soon.